Ross Chastain spun Kyle Busch around on the final lap of the Toyota Save Mart 350 at Sonoma. Chastain alleges one thing, but the NASCAR footage may reveal something else completely. And this incident has left Kyle Busch fuming, especially since this means he's now officially on his longest winless streak. The question now is when, not if Busch will take revenge on Chastain. But will that be justified? Is Chastain really the one to blame here? When Ross Chastain collides with another driver, it is always pointed out as his fault. It was so frequent that it was nicknamed Chastained. It's what occurs when the number one car unexpectedly hits you. Chastain and Busch were competing for a top 5 finish. Chastain overdrove a corner and locked up his brakes, sending Busch off the track. Ross Chastain and Kyle Busch haven't gotten into it that often. However, it appears that this one may roll over to next week. Busch has had a lot of rough finishes this season and will not be happy to see another top 5 finish slip from his hands. If Chastain wanted to get rowdy, he got it. Going to Iowa next week, the short track racing may be even more dramatic. However, Busch is developing rivals practically every weekend now. Busch's number 8 Richard Childress Racing Chevy spun at Turn 4A, just before the 1.99-mile road courses shoot, after colliding with the 2 drivers vying for 5th position. Busch recovered to finish in 12th place, his 4th consecutive finish outside the top 10. "We lost track position, but our strategy kept us in the game," said Busch, whose winless streak reached 37 races. "A couple of guys there at the end of the race had better tires than we did, but we were going to have a good day. Unfortunately, one of those guys got into us on the last lap and ruined our day. It's frustrating to not get the finish that we deserved." Kyle Busch's winless drought is now the longest in his NASCAR Cup career, but despite being wrecked on the final lap of Sunday's race at Sonoma Raceway, the 2-time series champion is getting closer to making the playoffs. Busch started the race 20 points below the playoff cut line. Despite that result, Busch remains 8 points behind Bubba Wallace for the last playoff place into the June 16th Cup race at Iowa Speedway. Chastain, on the other hand, raced in the number 1 Trackhouse Racing Chevrolet to his first top 5 finish since March, but stated afterward that he was still processing the strategy change that put him out of contention for the win, which went to a charging Kyle Larson. Chase Elliott's final turn push for position momentarily dropped Chastain out of the top 5, but he reclaimed 5th place as both drivers were blasted by a fuel-dry Martin Truex Jr. right before the finish line. "I'm not sure what happened with the 8, to be honest," Chastain said. "I'm pretty confused about most things here, but he checked up down into Turn 4A. I popped out to not hit him, and then I locked up getting in there to his right, so definitely not trying to run into him, and then I get run into by the 9, Elliott, for a spot in Turn 11. Lot of Chevrolet bow ties running together today. Glad one of them got the win." Speaking of terrible seasons, Ross Chastain isn't doing so well in 2024 either. In fact, this was Chastain's first top 5 result since Las Vegas in Week 3 of the season. This is his 4th top 10 finish. Good news for Chastain. He has only 1 DNF, so he's accumulated points at every race, more or less. It has kept him afloat, but without a win, his postseason berth is not certain. To be honest, this was going to happen given that both drivers needed to finish in the top 5. They were desperate, and when Chastain becomes desperate, he becomes vicious. That last move on Busch was the epitome of aggression. Ross Chastain, like he always does, will most likely pay for this at some time, or he might get away with it without any consequences. Kyle Busch will determine whether or not he gets payback, and if I were Chastain, I'd be terrified. But was it really Chastain's fault? Did he actually mean to hit Busch? Jeff Gluck and Jordan Bianchi discussed the last lap brawl between Ross Chastain and Kyle Busch at Sonoma Raceway. One person Kyle Larson had to pass on his way up through the field was Kyle Busch. "I think it was 3rd place at the time," Larson said afterwards as he was coming up to Kyle Busch. Given their incident last week, he was like, "All right, well, I guess we're about to find out whether we're good or not." He just basically let him go, raced him clean, knew he was on fresher tires, played it smart. It looked like he was going to be en route for a top 5 finish, until it appeared that he got Chastained at the end of the race, Gluck stated. Now, it sounded like Chastain said, "I didn't hear his TV interview, but I guess he'd indicated that he felt like Busch might have run out of fuel at that point or something. That something might have happened to that car to lead up to that, and that's why Ross got into him. Maybe, I'm not sure." But the in-car, I felt like Chastain just kind of slides up into him, kind of missed the corner and just took Kyle Busch out. It seemed to me that it was Chastain's fault. I would assume Kyle Busch is not happy about that. I would assume that'll probably carry over. He may retaliate at some point with Ross. He probably won't appreciate that. Bianchi agreed with Gluck and Busch, presenting some intriguing examples of Chastain's usual aggression, which we hadn't seen in a long time but returned during the day in California. I mean, we kind of saw this from Ross throughout the day, Bianchi said. There was a moment where he was racing Daniel Suarez, his teammate, at the end of the stage and he got aggressive a little bit, and Suarez came over his radio and was like, "What was going on there?" There was another moment or two on the racetrack where the numb one was aggressive today. Chastain was on it today. He wasn't like Ross circa 2023 and the early part of the year. He was certainly an aggressor today. The incident with Kyle Busch just seemed like, it didn't seem like Busch had a problem there. Let me put it this way, there was nothing said over the radio after Busch spun that indicated that he had a fuel issue or anything like that. It was a flat. The spotter came on and said, "We flat got dumped." And that's what it looked like. Kyle Busch's season of misery continues due to the Ross Chastain incident. Continuing, Bianchi added context to Busch's side of the tale, detailing how the collision turned Sunday afternoon from a fruitful one to another in a long string of poor performances for the Richard Childress racing driver. For Kyle Busch, this is just a continuation of what has been a very frustrating and way-begone season of just misery, Bianchi said. You have speed in your race car again for the second week in a row, and this time you again leave with a finish. Now, this wasn't necessarily your mistake, like a week ago, but still, you're looking at the standings, and he's 8 points out of a playoff spot. So, he was going to finish top 5. That's the difference between being in a playoff spot and not being in a playoff spot. Those points are going to be so valuable, and it just seems like this team, whether it's last week at Gateway or this week, earlier in the year, when they're having issues on pit road, they have just thrown away a lot of points this year, and it's not good. It more often than not ends up biting you in the butt when you're on the playoff bubble. And these are going to be a very long 10 weeks for this team, very nervous 10 weeks. Because the reality is too, they don't appear like they're close to winning. I know Austin Cindric came out of nowhere and won last week, and that can certainly happen with Kyle. We know that. He's got the talent. RCR's got the ability to do that. But consistency matters, and they just don't have consistent speed to think that they're going to go out there and win a race somewhere. Time will tell whether Kyle Busch replies to Ross Chastain's contact from Sonoma. But a win must be on the two-time NASCAR Cup Series champion's mind as he attempts to avoid missing the playoffs in 2024. What do you think? Will Busch retaliate in the upcoming race, making Chastain regret what happened last weekend? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.